The Magic of the Swatchways, Chapter 3. So little yet. With the perspiration running down my face, I dropped my suitcase and oilskin on the grass bank and sat down with a sigh. Each time the dusty road from Malden East Station to Heybridge Lock seemed to grow longer, and arrayed as I was in sea boots and the extra clothes squeezed out of an already overcrowded case, I found the afternoon sun exhausting. From where I lay on the cool grass in front of the yacht club house, the familiar scene gave a sense of repose after the rush of trains and buses. The ebb had been silently receding for nearly 3 hours, and on each side of the river the mudflats were uncovering rapidly. A small white-sailed barge yacht was trying to beat up against a dying westerly wind, and on the horizon it seemed Osey lay like a mirage with its purple undulating masses of trees. My eyes wandered listlessly over the few yachts riding to their moorings in Collier's Reach, and came to rest on the trim 7-ton yawl, which was to be my home for the next 3 days. Far away across the fields the chimes of Malden Church rang out sonorously. 5 o'clock, and I rested my head in the palms of my hands and stared lazily up at the deep blue sky. It seemed so peaceful. Footsteps scrunching along the gravel path just above my head brought me to earth again. They stopped hesitatingly, and I turned to meet the cheery face of the man who looked after my friend's yacht. "Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Mortimer hasn't arrived yet, although he said he'd here by 4. His eyes turned to the yacht as she lay tugging gently at her mooring chain. He stood thus for several seconds, in his old eyes that far-away dreamy look that comes to those who live all their lives on or near the sea. Then he added, "There won't be much water under her now, I reckon, and if you want to start tonight you'd better take her down to the first buoy opposite Northey, and you can pick your friend up from Mill Beach, just opposite there. I'll help you if you like." Thanking him for his advice, I declined the old man's offer, as I knew that a tea table awaited him in the little cottage near the post office. So, picking up my belongings and trying to force myself to realise that time and tide wait for no man, I walked down to the dinghy and was thankful for the first time that day that I was wearing my knee boots. Not all the mud at Heybridge is hard enough to walk on. There was obviously no time to be lost if I wanted to keep the boat afloat, and with unusual energy I dragged the reluctant staysail out of the overcrowded sail locker. I knew that the motor was in running order, but in such ideal surroundings the throb and clatter of an old engine would seem almost sacrilege. The blocks creaked as I hoisted the mizzen, and as if in answer to the stirring sound came the shrill call of a curlew from somewhere on the little sedge-covered island that's called Northey. Then others took up the song, and I found my pulse beating with suppressed excitement as I threw the mooring buoy overboard. It seemed as if that simple action had severed my connection with life on shore, and I thereby cut adrift the ties of convention, the unrealities and illusions of cities and crowds, that I was free now, free to go where I chose, to do and to live and to conquer as I liked, to play the game wherein a man's qualities count for more than his appearance. Far off down the river came that call again, shrill, abrupt, penetrating. It demanded an answer, and, as if she heard, the old ship seemed to strain forward on the sluicing ebb. The blue water parted at her stern and turned over into 2 diverging lines of chuckling ripples. The black buoy was steadily drawing closer. With the tide sluicing past its rusty sides, it rolled and swayed drunkenly, turning round first to the left, pausing then to the right, bowing grotesquely first to the Northey shore and then to the Pebble Beach shore, green weed hanging from its watermark and swaying in the fast-running water. For a moment it hovered abeam, then it had dropped astern, and the old vessel forged ahead, eager to be at sea once again. "Been to who, boy?" The familiar voice thundering across the receding water startled me. Of course the owner had arrived. Down went the helm, reluctantly, as though she hated delay of this sort. The yacht swung around head to wind and tide, her sails shaking restlessly, and over went the anchor with a rattle of chain. Half an hour later the dinghy grounded opposite the clubhouse once more, and panting, I shipped the oars after a tough pull against the fast-running ebb. My friend extended a brown hand. "You're a nice chap," he laughed, showing 2 rows of white teeth, "pinching a fellow's ship and running away with her. If I hadn't called you, you'd be dreaming past Osey by now." Humble explanations, that it was neither felonious intention nor mental aberration on my part, but solely a question of the depth of water at Heybridge Club at low tide that had prompted me to take his ship down the river, appeased my friend's wrath. Then, chattering in subdued voices, we floated down on the latter half of the ebb, while the Saltings on North East slipped silently by. We were alongside the yacht almost before we realised it, so strong is the tide here. How trim she looked, how dainty lying there, her new burgee flapping at the head of a newly varnished mast, her glistening topsides reflected faithfully in the almost glassy surface of the water, the delicate tracery of her rigging standing out so clearly against the deep blue of the sky. Yet how strong she was, with those powerful bows that have smashed many a green wave into scintillating foam, whose smooth sides have been groaning under the terrific onslaught of a hard sou'wester in the Wallet. She curtsied slowly to us as we stepped onto her deck, as though to welcome her owner. She knew, and the halyards ceased momentarily to quiver in the gentle breeze as if to pay homage to their master, and far away again came that shrill call of a curlew, his tiny form hidden by the high grass of Northey Island. "What shall we have for tea?" my friend's matter-of-fact voice broke upon my musings, with startling suddenness. Hadn't he seen how this ship had welcomed him? Hadn't he heard that call? Weren't his veins tingling with excitement, his pulse beating at the romance that lay beyond those wooded hills, where the sea even now was tumbling and sparkling in the waning sunlight? I fear that my reply as a guest was unnecessarily abrupt. Lying at full length on the afterdeck, I looked far down into the green depths and counted the jellyfish as their transparent, delicate forms floated languidly by. Invertebrate life, devoid of intelligence and feeling. Was man thus far back through countless ages, and had he, through numberless reincarnations, experienced those lessons that have more imperceptibly improved him, until, having passed through the animal kingdoms to the human, he has arrived at the stage of civilized man? And still, with vast improvements and alterations necessary, does he continue to pass through numberless incarnations, evolving meanwhile until... If you dream that much longer, your tea'll get cold. You'll feel much better after a cup. For the third time that evening I was brought down to earth with a shock, and realising that I'd been literally dreaming on the afterdeck while my indulgent host had been preparing tea. I entered the cosy cabin with guilt suffusing what I call my face. It is indeed strange, however, how the welcome odour of sardines and really hot tea banish one's higher thoughts and make life worth living once more. Finding the tea-cloth pressed affectionately into my hand as soon as tea was over, I busied myself with the prosaic task of washing up, surreptitiously placing things as they got broken under one of the berths, while the skipper bent the large jib. Malden was now silhouetted with wonderful distinctness against a flaming sunset, the little church spire standing out like a minaret of the east against a cloud deeply tinged with crimson. Clearly the chimes floated down to us again. 8 o'clock. From the fields beyond Mill Beach came the plaintive lowing of a solitary cow on her way home for the night. A slight mist was now rising over the canal at Heybridge, and several lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering gloom. Hardly worthwhile getting any canvas up, there's not a breath of wind. The skipper thoughtfully held the match up as he stood with his back to the cabin door and puffed rigorously at his newly lit pipe. "I want to get down at least to the Stone tonight," he added, "so we'll see what the engine has to say about it." That engine had a lot to say about it. It began with an angry snort, a dull bark, and then took up its song in earnest, throbbing with vigorous, powerful life. The anchor was catted and our bowsprit was turned downstream once more, the dinghy following obediently in the race left by the propeller, and again on Northey that shrill cry rang out, but this time a mocking cry of disgust, while the throb and clatter of metal did its best to drown the sound. "Jolly fine engine, this. No trouble to start." The skipper wiped his hands on a piece of oily waste, and his bulky form entered the cabin. On the eastern horizon, just beyond the trees of Osey, the moon was rising above the sea, paling the deep blue of the sky with her rich orange light. Presently the little jetty on the island was abeam, and the beweeded Barnacle, the old post to the east of the pier, glided by in solitary silence. The tide had turned now, and we had the young flood against us. Not a word was spoken till the Stone was passed by and the lights of Tollesbury had twinkled distantly into view. The skipper sat motionless and silent at the helm, his face in darkness, in the middle of which his trusty pipe burned like a red-hot coal. All around us nature seemed to be nodding. The birds were now silent. Not a sound broke the stillness on the broad river but the rhythmic beat and echo of the engine.
"It's after 11 o'clock, young feller, and there isn't going to be any wind till morning, so I propose bringing up right here."
The motor came to a final gasp and stopped. The anchor went overboard with a heavy splash. The chain rattled out through the fairlead till it was made fast to the bitts. Interest now centred itself around the cabin table, and an eager Primus noisily set to work to take the chill off coffee and other things. Some time later, with the supper things cleared, the skipper and I sat in silence on the cabin top with our feet on the rail. The moon was now high up in the sky, and the distant lights of Tollesbury had gone out one by one. Not a breath stirred.
"Don't believe in turning in straight on top of a heavy supper like that."
I turned a deaf ear to the outrageous remark and gazed with a sense of martyrdom at the dark line of the trees ashore. Very faintly a clock somewhere chimed the magic hour of 12. It thrilled me. This was the magic hour when the whole world was changed just for a little while, when the fairies came out from the moss and the ivy and danced in rings in the moonlight, and a gnome sat in their midst playing exquisitely on delicate pipes, and the owls, solemn and grotesque, sat on nearby boughs and disapproved sedately. Possibly even in that little spinney over there, where a light of some kind seemed to dance through the slender trees. I must have uttered my thoughts aloud, for the skipper took the pipe from his mouth and peered intently at me.
"I don't think the National Fairies Association Limited has yet adopted summertime," he said severely, "so the show won't be for an hour yet. It's only 11 o'clock, really. I think I'd turn in if I were you and sleep it off."
He is a soulless man.
"Bless my soul, if I don't drag him out in the morning, he'll lie there all day, till breakfast is ready."
Vehemently protesting, I was gripped by my ankle and dragged out of my warm berth to the floor. My aggressor, pardon, my host, departed backwards through the doorway with a devilish grin on his face. The linoleum of the floor was cold. My berth, for comfort, was ruined. I couldn't go to sleep again where I lay, try as I would. There was no alternative. I took the hint and got up. It was 7:15. A keen sou'wester breeze was blowing outside, and I began to wonder why men fit out ships and go all the way to the North Pole district in order to see what it's like to feel chilly. Thick rashers of bacon, bubbling eggs, slices of toast, marmalade and hot coffee, however, modified my opinion of East Coast yachting, and even succeeded in making me temporarily forgive the skipper for his harsh treatment. When he had at last finished consuming thick slices of bread and marmalade, and I'd ceased to wonder which would give out first, the loaf or the marmalade, the skipper leisurely lit his pipe and significantly held the dishcloth under my nose. I pretended to ignore it, but I defy anyone to sit in the cabin of a small yacht just after a meal, surrounded on all sides with unwashed saucers and plates and cups and things, with one's host waving the dishcloth before one's face, and to maintain a perfect demeanour of innocence as to the next thing to be done. I failed dismally, after a great effort, and so washed up. Washing up and folding one's blankets between them come near to putting me off yacht cruising altogether. Since it meant a good beat the whole way to windward, the Crouch was decided on as our destination today, and an hour later we were under way with all plain sails set. It was just about low water as we were abreast of Bradwell and passed close to one of the big steamers laid up in the middle of the channel. There were 8 of them, 6 steamers and 2 sailing ships, gaunt, deserted, lonely objects of despair, their black sides showing red with rust, their rigging moaning dismally in the wind, the tide gurgling sluggishly round their massive rudders, and the mooring chains grinding and rasping with startling stubbornness as the great hulls turned slowly round to meet the young flood. They seem uncanny. Dead they lie there, month after month, yet teeming with life and sound of a bygone age, and their vast and intricate interiors resonant with the moan of the wind through the open doors and portholes, ventilator shafts and hatches, and the incessant splash and wash of the water outside. But our little ship was taking all my attention as we dashed past. Clear of Sails Point and heading for Benchhead Buoy, we brought the wind abeam and lay down to our channel plates, and the occasional spray from the weather side cutting across the cabin top by the mast and pattering onto the forefoot of the mainsail. What unbounded life! How she now quivered with energy and strength, and how different she appeared under these conditions compared with last night's moonlit calm. At this state of the tide there would not be quite enough water over the Bachelor's Spit at the entrance to the Raisin, the channel that runs up towards the mouth of the Crouch River between the Buxey Sand and the Dengie Flats. Thus we kept our sheets eased off and raced on to the Bench-head buoy before close hauling and standing as near as the wind as we could towards the North Buxey buoy. There was a short, steep sea running, the kind of sea that curls and breaks and meets one's bows like the side of an upright wall, the kind that one always finds in shallow seas and shoal waters, where the bottom also is uneven and the tide strong. 2 yachts were following us out of the cone, both reefed well down, while another cutter near the Buxey beacon had hove to and was tying in a reef. A Thames barge yacht ran past, probably bound down the Wallet to Harwich, carrying full canvas and thrashing heavily against the foul tide.
"Fine going, old man," the skipper's voice shouted in my ear, "but we'll have to have a reef ourselves soon."
Crash, smash, clatter. As each steep sea encountered our weather bow, it was broken into flying fragments that hurled themselves across the dripping deck and stung our faces. We were driving the boat for all she was worth through a dull, desolate scene, and she resented it. The familiar Buxey beacon with its eternal cormorant holding on against the onslaught of the wind, while the seas foamed and raced 30 feet below him, passed in a scurry of spray, and the West Buxey gas buoy appeared at intervals as a dark mark on the crested seas far away could be seen to the southeast. The sky was black to windward, and the sea, now a much darker shade of grey capped with white hissing crests, was becoming heavier and more broken. Once or twice I had to ease the helm and allow the ship to luff into a sea for fear of the weight of water that would otherwise have come on deck. A reef became imperative. 3 minutes of breathless, arduous work, of clattering canvas and driving spray, of slippery decks and wild lurches, of dripping hands and straining reef points. Then off we went again, our mizzen and foresail stowed and a reef in the mainsail. She was blowing very hard now, and the yacht running out of the crouch had dropped her mainsail and was continuing under her 2 headsails only. Out from the black cloud the squalls came down more and more viciously, till our lee rail again became submerged, and the old yacht lay down and smothered herself in the seething spray.
"Look at our dinghy!"
I turned and caught sight of the little boat with her bow in the air. For one instant she remained almost on end, then the painter jerked taut, and she followed in a rush of foam. 1 or 2 green seas crashed over our foredeck and ran along the waterways in cascades over the counter. An old-fashioned yawl of about 12 tons caught us up and passed us close to windward, her long bowsprit burying itself in the seas and her square forefoot appearing as she reared her deep head and threw the spray high. It was a wild scene, typical of the East Coast in early summer. Dark grey seas, steep, curling with long white crests, following one another with ceaseless energy. Black low scurrying clouds above, the wind shrieking through the tautened rigging, and the spindrift dashing occasionally into the straining mainsail and beating against our salt-stained faces. But such is the very essence of yachting, the manly part of the game, the real test of ship and crew. It's comfortless, savage, cold, dangerous, wearying, terrifying at times, awe-inspiring, often needless and avoidable. Yet there is not a real sailor alive who does not enjoy putting his own ship through such weather, if only to prove that both she and he can stand it and come out triumphant. Half an hour later we were in still water, just laying our course along the south shore of the Crouch, the water quickly drying on our decks, the sun showing signs of peeping through a rift in the clouds, and when we finally brought up off the end of Pagglesham Hard in the Roach River, a feeling of satisfaction stole over us and made us forget the worst of it, and we forgot that we were cold and wet and hungry as we snugged all the dripping sails and halyards down and tidied up the old and trusty vessel. Next to Pinmill, I believe Pagglesham to be the prettiest village on the east coast, accessible to the yachtsman. Hidden in the midst of a little wood, it's approached from the Hard by a winding lane, and to a stranger its presence is not suspected until a sudden turn in the lane reveals quaint cottages and their thatched roofs. Thither we laid our tracks in search of butter and new-laid eggs. The wind was dying away as we got aboard, and the evening was turning out fine. The little white horses had disappeared now, and nothing but ripples remained, and occasional cat's paws flurried across the surface of the water like the footprints of invisible water sprites playing hide-and-seek. Work had finished in the barge repairing shed at the head of the Hard, and the men had returned to their simple homes in the still of the evening. From the hidden village distinctly came the sound of voices, and of a dog barking, and happy cries of children playing on the green. Our burgee was momentarily flapping more languidly, and the incessant tap-tap of the halyards gave way to periods of rest. The ebb was sluicing past now, silently conveying thousands of tons of water out into the North Sea.
"I think you said you'd get the tea ready tonight."
The skipper's insistent voice broke jarringly on my itinerant thoughts, and reminded me of the promise I had made in a rash moment, hoping he'd forget all about it. Therefore, with bowed head, partly due to the lack of headroom in the cabin, I entered to perform my duties. I fully realised that we shouldn't have any tea unless I did so.
"I've been thinking," quoth my host to my undisguised astonishment, as the latter swirled the plates around with a disgracefully dilapidated mop. "It wouldn't be a bad idea to take the last of this ebb down to Brankfleet Spit. It'll be handier for getting away in the morning."
Thus, as the sinking sun was tinging the ripples behind us with the caps of molten gold, our good ship once more turned her sturdy bowsprit seaward and began to glide down the Roach River on the last of the ebb. The dying breeze was pressing her white sails into those full bellying curves that are so beautiful to the eye that sees and appreciates. Astern lay a wake of scintillating glory, while over Rochford Way the sun was rapidly disappearing behind a group of Scotch firs, gauntily silhouetted against his crimson face.
"Keep a bit further off the shore, old man."
My host's patient tones struck shame into my heart, and I pushed the helm gently to port, making a mental vow to keep my eye on the bowsprit in future. The breeze was hardly stirring the burgee now, and the yacht scarcely had steerage way. There was but little ebb left, and as we drifted slowly down the last reach of the Roach towards Bankfleet Spit, where it joins the Crouch, night mysteriously drew her veil over the land.
"This'll do, I think. Let go." Splash and brrr.
The white hull turns around slowly as her anchor bites into the mud, and one by one the ghostly sails flutter down and are furled. The lights of Burnham twinkle in the distance, and the sound of a train with a healthy exhaust climbing the Althorn bank comes clearly to us. Then on Foulness, the other side, comes a plaintive lowing of some cows as they stumble homeward in the darkness. On one side, civilization; on the other, the simple life; below, a cross between the two, the skipper frying steak over a primus. We did not rise with the lark. I cannot believe that the famous early riser of the ornithological tribe would stay in bed until 10:15. We'd had intended getting up really early, having a nice dip, a row in the dinghy, a little walk ashore, and in fact all those things that one feels one ought to do in the early soulless hours of the morning. But we did get up, which is something, and we got under way within 2 hours of our rising, while a gentle southwesterly air wafted us out to the West Buxey Buoy. We had, however, lost our tide. The flood was pouring up the coast and into all the numberless creeks and dykes and channels in the coast, and filling up the narrow waterways that at high water separate the numerous islands that form the county of Essex. But the wind began to fail, and we slowly drifted astern. The sun, however, overcome by that curiosity that would almost seem to belie his sex, peeped from behind the clouds to see whither the wind had gone, and gave us, in place of it, a gentle air from the south-east. The old ship sluggishly gathered way, while we stirred our lazy limbs and paid out the drooping sheets. The fairy-like music commenced at the bow in a gentle crescendo, and rose to a steady melody as the breeze strengthened.
"Different here now from yesterday."
The skipper was lying at full length on the foredeck, his head resting on his hands and his feet hanging over the rail, while large smoke rings issued from his mouth. The Buxey beacon was passing but slowly off to starboard, and we could see the swirl of water as it flowed past the decaying post. The wind was failing again, and the boom lifted and fell lazily, and the staysail hung motionless over the inert form of the owner of the boat.
"We're drifting back."
Slowly the old beacon was passing again in the opposite direction. Bleak and ugly like one of the old French railway semaphores, it was slipping ahead of us again, while the solitary cormorant sat on its top and mocked us grotesquely. Around us on the oily water lay several white sails. One or two were moving, and the faint sound of their auxiliary motors came to us. Half an hour went by and no wind came. The beacon was half a mile ahead of us again. The skipper lifted his head sleepily and yawned.
"What about some engine?"
he suggested lazily. Across the water a dark line was approaching from the shore. "There's a breeze coming, so don't fret about that engine." The skipper lay back, relieved, and the boom slowly jibed over, the head sails filled, and once more the dinghy began to run after the yacht, talking the while. The air, coming from the due west, increased in little puffs, and before long we were beating against a stiff breeze towards the Nass Beacon at the entrance to Mersey Quarters. With 3 other yachts bound the same way, there followed a glorious beat against the gathering tide into Mersey Quarters, where we let go at the head of Verley Creek against the old striped fishery beacon. About noon the next day, old Bint lay once more on her moorings opposite the clubhouse at Heybridge. Her sails were now stowed, and her owner was reluctantly making fast the last tier around the mainsail. On the cabin table, the railway timetable lay open at the page on which read Up trains, Malden East and Liverpool Street. The mate, with shaven chin and stiff collar, was tragically hauling in the dinghy's painter bit by bit, while his dripping hands ran affectionately along it and cleared it of the clinging weed. And far away, from the other side of Northey, came that old familiar call. But this time in vain, for the short holiday was over. Naught but happy memories now remained.